Hey. Hi everyone. I will talk about abusing Bash on Windows. The idea of the presentation is you've got some code execution on a Windows box. There is some Bash on it, like Cygwin or WSL, and what can you do with that in order to do some post-exploitation. I'm a pen tester at Entity Security France, and I will talk about Bash on Windows. The fact is interesting for an attacker, how to backdoor it, and some other stuff about AppLocker and forensics. All the scripts of the presentation are available on GitHub. The aim is to be reproducible by you, and if you need to do the stuff, you can do it just by copy-pasting my scripts. So Bash on Windows. Now we have two software. There is Cygwin. Since 2001, it's not distributed by Microsoft. It's available since XP, but it's working on older version. And since 2 years, we have WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux. It may replace Cygwin in the time. It's not installed by default on Windows, but it's edited by Microsoft. And for now, it's only for Windows 10 and Windows Server 2019. I looked for some previous research on these tools. I didn't find anything on Cygwin, only some CVE. And as WSL is very young, there had some research at Recon or Blue Hat. So, how can you install it? Cygwin, it's a basic installation file. For WSL, it's little more complicated. You need to enable developer modes, reboots, the Windows subsystem for Linux, reboots, and then you will have on the Microsoft Store some different subsystems. And you can install all the subsystems on the same computer. You can have Debian on Kali and OpenSUSE and so on. For Cygwin, it's just a classical installation file. You just have to choose your package at the installation. And the main difference between these both systems is that Cygwin is running some PE file. It's Bash, but it's executable file from the Windows world. In WSL, you are running real ELF file, and you can compile a file on your classical Linux, put it on Windows, and execute it. Cygwin is on the C folder, and for the fun facts, everyone can read every file in Cygwin. So if you have two users in the Cygwin world, the first user can read the file from the second user. So if you stored your SSH key on Cygwin, everyone on the system can read them without being system. For WSL, it's a little small, but it's more complicated because at the beginning there were only Ubuntu on Windows, so there were only one path for the Linux file system, and since there is a lot of version, they did the stuff with some package, and you can have many folders and many file systems. And if you install Kali on Debian on your Windows, you will have two Linux file systems, two Linux kernel, and so on. At the first run, when you run Cygwin, it's just created some classical Linux file like bashrc and so on. Oh, it's small. When you run a WSL system at the first time, it asks you for a password for your sudo accounts, because you have sudo on WSL. And the fun fact with that is, there is sudo and you run bash on WSL, you will not be able to run etc shadow because you are not root. But the file system is stored in your own app data file, so you can read it from Windows. So you've got a password that you cannot read from bash, but you can read from cmd.exe. They are stored here. This is the old version at the top, and at the bottom it's the newer version. The package name depends on the subsystem you used and the version. I did a Metasploit post module that will try to find every shadow file and download it if you already have code execution. And if your system, you can read with a Linux file system of every user. You can easily call your Cygwin or your bash system from Windows. For Cygwin, you have to use the full path of the scripts. And for WSL, there is a variable in the path that can allow you to use bash or Debian and so on. There are there. And you can do the other way. You can call some Windows command from the Linux system by using the full path, or just running cmd.exe. So you can run bash from cmd, cmd from bash, rerun bash from cmd, and so on. It's like an exception. It's kind be on a normal thing, but you can think it's a normal thing. You can create a file from Windows and read it in your Linux file system. Here I'm creating a file from in the Linux file system from Windows, and I can read it. The same thing for Cygwin. But on the first version of WSL, if you created a file from Windows, the file didn't exist in the Linux file system. And this created the first problem of WSL. It's the AV wasn't able to monitor what was happening in this system. So at the beginning of WSL, you had a lot of malware that cannot be seen in the subsystem. Now they are seen, but the fun fact is if you created a meterpreter for Windows, most of the AV will know it as a malicious file. And if you created a meterpreter for Linux, it will not be seen by so many AV. So as you have your Linux file system, WSL, that can run ELF file, you can run Linux malicious file and evade some AV on the system. So why I've been interested in Bash for Windows? The user of that tools are developers, admins, incident response team, and everything I can do on a Linux box, I cannot do it on a Windows box, and I can also try to use malware from the Linux world. Everything next is assume that you already have a code execution on the machine. It's not having code execution. It's just post-exploitation. Some example, it's you've got a remote code execution on a computer and you want to hide a reverse shell into WSL process because it's less monitored. Or you have a remote code execution, there is WSL, you read the etc shadow file, you are able to crack the hash. Maybe the password is used somewhere else. So for the remote shell parts, there is 2 points. There is the one-liner remote shell you can have from Linux systems and the meterpreter one. So I just look for a cheat sheet from Pentest Monkey, a list of one-liner reverse shell. I just don't use Java because I had to compile some stuff, and I look into every system which one is using by default Bash, Perl, and so on. And you've got a lot of remote shell by default. There's just some Ruby or Netcat which is not working. Netcat is because you don't have the -e option. And for Ruby, it's because on Pentest Monkey, it's for Ruby 1.9, and now you have Ruby 2.1, 2.2, so on. So you can easily change the line, and it's still working. If you really want to use a reverse shell from a tool that is not installed, you might be able to install it. On WSL, it's like on your classic Linux. You just need to be root on the Linux, and for Cygwin, you need to have local administrator privilege, so it can be hard. And for the meterpreter part, as I told before, Cygwin is not able to run ELF, so it's not working. But WSL can run ELF, so I don't know why staged payload not working on WSL, but stageless payload do. So you can easily, having a meterpreter here, it's a Linux meterpreter, run on WSL, and then you can call your cmd.exe and have your cmd from Linux reverse shell. And there is no screen in WSL. It's not working. Even if you install it, it will not work. But you have Tmux, which is working, so you can hide your reverse shell in WSL. And the user will only see a bash process running and without know what is running in it. The other stuff is how can we steal passwords, hash, or elevate using bash? The first case is I had a small script at Bash Startup. It's very classic on the Linux world and backdooring Linux. And it's performing an assembly request to my computer. The idea is to call the assembly request with responder. I can do that from the Windows world. I have code execution. I can already do that. But if I backdoor Bash, every time the guy will run Bash, I will have the hash. And if he changes his password, because you have to change his password every, 60 days, I will have the new hash every 60 days. Or if I can execute code on a computer which is off the network, for example, a non-log computers, I can do that, and when you will go back on the network, I can get the hash. So it's a pretty small script, easy one. You can use responder to catch the hash or use a relay attack, and it's pretty easy. You just, I run, here it's Cygwin, I backdoor Cygwin, I quit, and when the user will run Cygwin again, it will perform a SMB request. So there is no request here. The user is running Cygwin. It's a little bit slow. I don't know, because it's Cygwin. And I have got my SMB requests on the network. Okay, so I can cause it. After that, it's some classical stuff like get the bash sudo password. So it's not working on Cygwin because there is no sudo. The idea is to create a fake sudo scripts. We will ask the password to the user and then run the real sudo scripts, sudo binary. It's pretty easy. You can either pass on a file system or send it over the network. It's nothing really new in there. It's just that you can steal a password and maybe it will be reused somewhere else. So you can see it or not? Yeah. So we can see the real sudo one. And when the user rerun again, it asks for his password. So every time he runs sudo, the first time it failed, so it may give him a hint that there is something wrong, and it can fail 4 times, that this is not normal on Linux. So you will have a hint of that, but you already have the passwords. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We can do that, but we can also ask for the Windows password from bash. Every time you run WSL, if there is updates needed, it will tell you, hey guy, you need to update WSL. So you just add to that a small script asking for his password, and you can get it. It's really the same idea. It's just about having the Windows part. And you can do that because you can interact between Windows and Linux, and you can get his Windows username from the Linux system very easily. Here it's a domain account. Normally you can see Hack.lu, Cervoise on Hack.lu domain. So you can get this password and you can do stuff really realistic, but it will run every time, so it can give hints to that too. Okay. And the fourth idea I had, it was about asking admin privilege. You may just want to ask the user to run privilege software like Meterpreter or Mimikatz. For that, I found 3 options: the run as from the command line, the run as from PowerShell, and shell run as from sysinternals. For the run as from the CLI, it's not working because you run the Windows binary, it's asking you to type the passwords in the Windows CMD. You are not in the Windows CMD, so it's crashing. On the PowerShell stuff, that's what is really nice. It's the user must elevate. If you use a non-privileged account, it will not work. It will ask him to retype a password. And if you run a script, it will tell you that you are running Windows command processor. So if you put Metasploit or Mimikatz in a CMD bat file, it will tell you, oh, it's signed by Microsoft, but it's not. And if you are using sysinternals, there is some stuff like saying sysinternals bat. It's pretty weird. So as the user must elevate with PowerShell, I choose that, and it's okay. The next one. The idea is the same. It will just ask for the password of the user. But here you are not stealing the password. You are just getting privileged accounts. So I try with the non-privileged accounts. It will tell me this request an elevation, and then I will get it's not a script. I just run a CMD for the demo, and I am a local admin with that. So that's just basic Linux stuff on Windows, but what about AppLocker? I'm not here to tell you how to implement AppLockers. There is a lot of stuff on the internet to well implement AppLockers. There is some default rules from Microsoft, which are sometimes wrong because you can execute everything from the Windows folder. There is a temp folder in it. My idea was to say, okay, you restrict the user with AppLocker, and you allow him to run Cygwin or Bash, and what can be done. So here I cannot run a script from the Cygwin path because I forbid the scripts, but I can run Bash scripts from Cygwin. It's normal. And if I try to do that on WSL, it's the same thing. But if I try to call some cmd.exe and so on, and it's forbidden, I will not be able to do that. No, I tried to compile a hello world file on Cygwin. I tried to execute it, and it failed because, as I told you before, it's a P file, and the P file is forbidden. But if you do that on WSL, you will be able to run your Linux file. So you can, even if there is AppLocker, if WSL is authorized, you can compile everything you want and do what you want. The only stuff is that GCC is only enabled with / and OpenSUSE for Windows. I also asked myself if I can bypass Smart Screen, but in fact, Smart Screen can be bypassed only by running your binary from this command line. So. And that's points some question about forensics, because now you have to look into the Bash system for forensic, the Bash history, the path, and so on. And for example, if you run Cygwin and another user is running Cygwin and you do PS, you will see his process. But as every user has his own WSL, you won't see his process. And if you try to dump memory from Task Manager from ELF, which is running, you won't be able to do that because Windows don't know how to do it. So how Windows can handle the WSL memory, how can you investigate WSL sub-process that is not run by you, and so on. Okay. And the end is just some bonus. It's, I don't know if some of you remember GNU Win32 is just some shell escape from mostly CTF and how to do them on GNU Win32. Okay. Is there any question?
Any questions in the room? No? And well, Tony, you'll be around outside if anybody wants to speak, so thank you very much.